Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about handovers. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how do you hand over a role as a contractor when you start a new job? There is no one to hand over to and I have to write really detailed documentation waiting for them to find someone to replace me and have to work beyond a normal notice so their company doesn't fall apart if I just disappear. Even stuff like servers, BI dashboards makes it difficult to do while I'll be working in another role that overlaps in time with the old job. Okay, I'm botching your description here or your comment, but what I can derive is you're doing a handoff, they're scrambling to find someone to do the said handoff to, and now you're over time and you've started a new position and so forth and so forth. Well, let's talk about handoffs first and foremost. So this comes at a timely point, I would say, for me, because I literally today had I had a review. Let me tell you a little bit what I've been doing and sort of how that hopefully ties into my answer to this question. So, one of my jobs at my current company is to basically act as a bit of a rubber duck or technical expert and so forth for teams who are in a bit of, well, let's just say that they haven't been doing so well, or they need help with something. And the specific team that I was talking to, they had a bit of an issue figuring out how to basically do all the things. And I do mean all the things that the specification or the request for support that I got was, can you just look over everything and see what we can do better, or like sort of what could we try out? And so I always tell people the same thing, like I can give you what I think would make sense, but it's up to you to determine whether or not that actually fits for your use case or for your situation, because I mean, just because I think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good idea. But so the thing I do is that I go and, like, I have never touched their source code whatsoever, none of it. And the first thing I do is I take a look at the repository, and I notice very quickly that there's basically, as you can imagine, no documentation, of course. But what's more important than the fact that there is no documentation is that the repository has in the root 5 different folders, whereof which is like apps, contracts, system, something, and then like APIs or something, and so forth and so forth. And I find myself immediately asking the question, where is the source folder? Because if I open these things, one of them has like some like documentation and some projects here and there, right? And then another one has a JavaScript application in it, and then the other one there has another JavaScript application in it, and so forth. And I struggle to understand, like, what I basically do is I use Git to just validate which folders are being changed, so I can figure out is there any dead, are these all used and so forth. But that initial reaction that I had was that felt unintuitive to me. And so what I go and I do is that I tell them, one of the first things that you could take a look at is to structure your source code and all the stuff that you are working with in a way that feels intuitive to the consumer, because there are, as we all know, conventions in certain languages. For example, my favorite weird convention, if you ask me at the very least, is Java, where you have that package structure from the source all the way down to, like, basically using a organization number as a nesting mechanism to nest package or nest folders until you get to the end of the package declaration. And that, although it is a little bit weird, is a very strong convention, which means that for most people going to a Java application, they will expect to see that. Now, why is that significant for your situation? I'm glad you asked. Because the same sort of structures are true for any source code for quite a lot of things. And the thing that I will do when I try to set up my projects so that handoffs are painless is that I take inspiration from the open source communities. I take inspirations from really known projects that do documentation and stuff like that really well, like they have it really nailed down, and I just steal their ideas and their conventions for how to do things, so that because I know that whoever I'm handing off to, or whoever's going to take up after me, I mean, that's my whole deal at my job, for example. I am so, in terms of like knowledge transfer, so ready to get another job at any moment, because I've set up my entire work process that, well, I'm not sure if I told you this, guys, but I work with like everything I do is in a Git repository. And it's basically, as you can imagine, it's just like one big open source project. Anybody, I give everybody like access to it. So if they want to add their own stuff or so forth, they're very welcome to do so. And it's structured exactly as you would imagine. There's like a docs folder. There's a folder for my pipelines. There's a folder for the source, and then there's like in the docs folders, I have tons of documents where it's just markdown files and so forth. Is that references, like everything from guides to how to do things, or I might have like in the source folder, for example, I have a few products that I've built or that I need to maintain. One of them is, for example, a business dashboard made in Power BI, and it's just a product in the source, and I treat it just as you would expect, to a certain degree, a mature open source product to work. Okay, so there's a folder, the code or the scripts or whatever I'm having, because some of it is just, like it's not even like a real product, it's just utility scripts and stuff like that. But there's a README file giving the person who's opened that specific folder just the insight, okay, this is where I'm storing A, B, and C, and this is what they need in order to get started. I try to think about the way that I'm going to do the handoff as it's just a bunch of folders with different like projects in it and configurations and stuff like that. And all I really have to give the other person is two things. I need to tell them if there's something outside of that folder they need to be aware of in order to just get the thing working on their local machine. And the second thing is I need to make sure that if they need to be able to talk to someone because their system has some type of integration and so forth, they know who to talk to. That is my general strategy, and it works pretty well, honestly. And so I would suggest that you do that thing. Like, don't go into painful detail, I argue, in documentation and things like that, because the thing that you're going for is there's no way you're going to be able to completely make everything that you know about this system just transfer over to text. That is the idea of someone who doesn't really, I argue, remember how many, because if that was possible, then every one of us would be a math genius. It's not how it works, guys. It's much more difficult than that. And so what I argue to you is that like the reason why you get that sort of pressure usually from the companies, because they're desperate. Like they have no plan, and so they want you to write everything in painful detail because they know that they are going to have to do a knowledge transfer here. And my argument to you is that the best thing that they can do is to get themselves a really senior experience who knows how to onboard themselves more or less. And the best thing and the nicest thing I argue that you can do for them is to make sure that when they get to the project, they feel as if, this feels sort of intuitive because it's structured the same sort of way I expect a lot of the other projects that I've been on. Like it feels familiar, the conventions are there, so to speak. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you're going to do a handoff, try to think in terms of when you go and read documentation on open source projects, or when you see them, or like it doesn't have to be an open source project, but I hope that you can understand sort of what I'm going for. That like if you think about the products like phones or anything like that, there's a lot of intuitive interfaces and conventions that you sort of expect as a consumer of the thing, and that it makes it easier for you to navigate. Even if it's a phone that isn't your specific model, you can sort of use it because it feels it's structured in a way that feels familiar and consistent with other projects or other products similar to it. Do the same thing. Write down, as I said, like this, use the same structure as you do in an open source project. Like I prefer to just use one monorepo for all the things, which I have like where I have the same sort of folder. Guys, most of the editors, like I use VS Code, for example, it has like special icons if I use the name that is most conventional, for like docs, for example, in the root. That's super standard. These things makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, and it makes it easier for people to sort of figure out where everything is. And then you try to centralize all the things you might have across the whole system into that repository. If, for example, if you have external systems or configurations that you may not be able to clone or like use inside of repo, then just create a file that points to that place with just a bit of a description of how to get that information. So the only thing you really have to hand over is a repository where all the folders with the source code and so forth have a README that sort of explains how to get started locally and things like that. And then try to do that as a handoff, because you're going to have to accept, I argue, as both you and the companies, you're going to have to accept that there's no way for you to perfectly describe everything about everything you're doing in text format and then have that transfer. So my argument is they have to find someone who can sort of just dive in and figure stuff out. And the nicest thing you can do is to make that process for them as easy as possible when you do the handoff. Have a great day.